welcome you to our new space here. I think it's safe to say new, even though it's been 8 months or so. My name is Johnny Schwab. I'm the director of IBEAM, and IBEAM is an organization that works to ensure that artists are at the center of the invention and design of our shared future. We've been around for 20 years, and I welcome you to learn more about the organization online. And so please you all could join us tonight, both here at Cook Street, as well as those of you who are tuning in remotely via live stream. For September's IBEAM Assembly, a monthly public program inviting artists and thinkers to take on the biggest issues facing the fields of art and technology, along with the broader implications on society. Tonight's assembly, Hacking Hustling, a platform for sex workers in a post-cesspool world, this program we're particularly honored to present here at IBEAM. We believe in being a space where discussions of the most pressing issues of today can not only happen freely, but also lead to organizing, skill sharing, and action. Tonight's program is the first part of a 2-day gathering of conversations and tactical workshops led by sex workers who generate knowledge that has been erased in the wake of this past spring's CESA legislation. Both events were organized in collaboration with Melissa Jarrett Grant, who is a senior staff reporter covering criminal justice at The Appeal, and the author of Playing the Whore, The Work of Sex Work, published by Versa. It was organized along with Danielle Blunt, who is the NYC-based dominatrix and sex worker rights activist. I'd like to thank you all for your participation tonight and encourage you to join us on Saturday for the IBEAM Exchange for a deep dive into strategies and tools for digital safety led by T4 Tech. Please check in with any of the incredible team members here tonight if this is of interest to you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Tina, who will handle some housekeeping, and I hope that you will join us again here at IBEAM. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to keep your houses. I'm sad that I didn't get to read your bio that talks about how you like to make men cry and help communities thrive. It was next time. Cool, so I'm going to read. Hi, I'm Tina. How's everybody doing? You guys feeling good? Cool. What's that? Oh, who am I? I'm not supposed to introduce myself. I don't know. What can I say? Talk to me afterwards. Ask them what I do. So I'm Tina, and I'm going to read these community agreements that is language adapted from Collective Sex, the Alt-Div, did I pronounce that correctly? Alt-Div Hummingbirds, and BU, FU, 5S, 4S community agreements. You guys are ready to hear some community agreements? Yeah. And agree to them as a community? Okay, cool. Number 1, we respect the diversity of identities, including gender, pronouns, race, nationality, religious background, ability, work experience, and other vibrant, multifaceted aspects of who we are. Number 2, we honor each other's boundaries, both emotional and physical. This includes crosstalk and unsolicited advice. One diva, one mic, let someone finish speaking before taking your turn. Comment only from relating from your own perspective. Number 3, we give care to how we communicate. And use language that is clear, inclusive, and rooted in the I, and are mindful to allow time for others to speak. Number 4, we show up fully and commit to being accountable to one another. This is a consent-forward space. If you're going to be posting images of anybody other than the people on the panel, please ask for consent first. Also, everybody on the panel, do you have everyone's consent to have your picture taken and posted on the internet? It's also okay if you don't. Okay. Oh, also we're live streaming, so it's already hashtag ask first. Cool. So let's see, people on the panel asking for consent first. Ask for consent before touching or hugging other people. Try it, I like it. We have community members, co-conspirators, and allies in the room. Don't make assumptions about anyone's identity or work experience. Number 5, we give importance to self-care, body care, and spirit care, and each person's individual truth about what they need to feel their fullest and wholest. If anyone is feeling triggered or unsafe, please let a trusted individual know, or the safety monitor. So I am the community safety monitor. So if you want to talk to me about any way that you're feeling, tonight's the night. And then Joanna and Jay are the people from Ivy that you can talk to. So we encourage you to talk to us for any reason, but especially if you're feeling triggered or unsafe. We are here for you. Number 6, we care for the space that we are in and recognize that outside these doors is an area that is heavily policed, and we can't guarantee that inside these doors police aren't present. Number 7, move up, move back. Be cognizant of who speaks first, who speaks most, and who speaks last. Please feel empowered to move up to take more space if that's not your tendency. Move back to allow others to speak who might not be as heard. Number 8, don't steal from sex workers. Our work is erased all the time. You are here to learn, so if you learn something, quote your motherfucking sources. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Melissa Gier Grant and Danielle Blunt.
Thank you, Tina. I think that's to be all fancy. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? There's a lot of technology in here.
So Melissa and I first started talking about bringing together sex workers and journalists and digital rights activists and other allies the morning after the fact. We were gathered at an emergency community meeting at the Urban Justice Center Sex Worker Project. And we were talking about our frustration with the lack of response from the tech community in regards to sex and FOSTA and how alienated it felt. I mentioned to Melissa that I was interested in reaching out to IB to see if they would put on some form of harm reduction programming. I had recently finished listening to their panel series, New Topics in Social Computing, and they covered really important topics like consent, emotional labor, and resistance under surveillance. And despite these very relevant topics, sex work was noticeably left out of the conversation. Sex workers are the people that are most impacted by the themes in this series, and one of the communities most impacted by poorly designed technology and legislation, and yet we're always left out of the conversation. The silence from the tech community in regards to FOSTA and FESTA was deafening. And the silence served to further disappear an already vulnerable and isolated community. But losing access to online resources isn't something that's new to us. As long as we've been working online, our content's been policed. When we come up with workarounds and new tools, it's only a matter of time before they're lost and we have to adapt again. Sites come down or new ones pop up. And in between, many of us suffer as we lose access to our income, our communities, and to safer working tools. We've been having these conversations for years, and just now is the mainstream media starting to listen. And as Tina said, sex workers' work is routinely stolen. So if you learn something, don't appropriate it as your own thought, credit your sources, even if they don't have degrees, even if they're sex workers. Many of us in academia are too. What this event is about is flipping the script, centering sex workers as producers of knowledge and expertise.
So, Blunt mentioned that sex workers have been organizing for a long time around all these issues, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of that. 12 years ago, I came to IB for the very first time. It wasn't a space, it was a space over in Chelsea. It was an event to recognize an IB resident named Noreen Levy, who had done this project called the Aphrodite Project Platforms. It was a shoe that had, at the time, a telephone, a cell phone in the base of it, so it could send out a GPS signal so that if a sex worker wanted to share her location with trusted people, she could do that, or he could do that, or they could do that, so that if anything happened to them, they could get support immediately. There was a screech alarm in there, and a later version of it had like a screen in it, so you could like play videos and photos. And it was 2006, right? And the conversations we were having about the internet and sex work were really different. I think we would have a whole other set of responses right now to the idea of a sex worker passively generating a GPS signal, because we know what would happen, right? We know how interesting that data would be to law enforcement and other types of people who like to surveil sex workers. We are also here tonight in significant part due to the work of IB resident Ingrid Burrington, who's back there. I will not embarrass Ingrid any further, but this spring, we were part of a conference that Ingrid put on called Future Perfect at another institution. Blunt and I actually made a presentation about SESTA. We talked about how SESTA became an issue. SESTA as a piece of legislation is really wonky and complicated and should never have been a watershed moment for sex workers' rights. It talks about really intricate parts of the communications law that govern how the internet works. It was largely sold to the public as a way to prevent children from being sold for sex. Nothing about this should have appealed to a mass audience. If I was workshopping this would not have been the one. But it took off. And part of that is because sex workers are at such a critical mass online and online organizing, and the sex workers who are most affected by this were able to use the internet to huge advantage to draw attention to this. But we know that SESTA also wasn't the beginning. We know that in 2010, Craigslist took their erotic services section offline after they were under similar scrutiny. We know that before that, there have been a lot of panics about what sex workers are doing online in our cities. This is something in a way that this community is really prepared to take on, even if legislators aren't listening, even if the larger tech world isn't listening. This probably wouldn't have been so devastating for sex workers. The odds would not have been so stacked against sex workers in Congress if the larger tech community, particularly the digital rights community, were more on sex workers' side. And there's some notable exceptions to that, but for the most part, the big tech companies support legislation like this, and the smaller ones aren't in a position of much influence anyway. Sorry about that. So, just to sum up, this has been happening for years. It's nothing new. It feels like it's happening faster now, but that's also because this community is mobilized so quickly.
The structure of this event is intentional. We want to first elevate the lived experiences and expertise by being listened to before people come in and offer technologies or ideas to save us. So that's why we're doing the panel first, and we hope some of y'all will join us for Saturday for the exchange and learn some tactical skills of super tech. We want to remind you of the importance of listening to the communities impacted by the problems that we're brainstorming solutions to tonight. We want to remind you that there are people in the community doing the work that we can learn from. Hustling is something that many of us in this room are quick at. At an organizing meeting in response to SESTA and FOSTA, I've heard one person say that they've been hustling and making rent by wishing white men happy birthday on a popular social networking site. Our resilience and creativity are remarkable, and we will continue to hustle. But that doesn't mean that we don't experience very real loss, including the loss of members of our community. As a former care coordinator for Persist Health Project, a New York City organization working to bridge the gap in health and social services for people impacted by the sex trade, we used to say that we make broken systems work for beautiful people. And I felt that my job as a care coordinator was an inherent act of hustling. An act of hacking the medical industrial complex to make it a little less hostile. I conceptualize hustling as a matter of getting the shit that we need regardless of the systems that are put in place to stop us from protecting each other and from surviving. When the Academy cannibalizes and regurgitates our content and remains silent in the face of our erasure, we demand to be heard and to be recognized and to be paid for our labor and our expertise. This isn't exclusive to educational institutions. Even institutions working at the intersection of technology and rights have ignored the needs of sex working people long before SESTA, and it continues to this day. The act of partnering with IBM is a beautiful act of hustling. IBM, you've been a really great patron. Institutions often overlook how important shifting resources, prestige, and institutional power to a community can be. An impressive line in a resume can be the ability to transition out of sex work should you so choose. By established institutions saying that this is something that deserves to be talked about, it becomes something that is talked about. It becomes something where resources can be driven to solutions that serve us rather than save us. By an institution paying community for their expertise, the expertise of the community is elevated and our work is seen as work. So thank you, Ivy, for listening, for shifting resources to our community. We're really glad to be here.
So speaking of resources, you may have noticed over here this history of sex work online that is meant to be collaborative. In the wake of Sex Work Lost, I think a lot of us have been asking ourselves what pieces of sex work history could get erased from the internet. And this is also a history that isn't particularly well archived anyway. It may not have been something we were thinking about, it may have been something we were scared to do because we didn't want to out ourselves or out activists or increase harm to the community by being tracked or surveilled. And also services take our content down all of the time. There are some events on there that I remember being part of, and I can tell you there is absolutely no internet trace left of them. So this is our humble effort with Post-it notes that will someday become a web page. Is that a thing? It's a web page? It'll be at least 2 web pages. Please, come and contribute to this after. We're going to have time to mingle and hang out after we speak, and you can also chat with panelists, but if you're shy or if you're resistant to that, you can go over there and make your contribution.
Feel free to ask some personal experiences too, if you feel like that's relevant.
Personal.
And so we also have, okay, Ingrid made this amazing resource of internet safety.
Oh my God,
and
this
there's
guy needs to
really
get in the
content
way.
in it, as well as sort of explaining how the internet works and where your data is stored. I think one of the issues in the sex working community that I saw is a lack of literacy around tech. So it leads to this mass hysteria. And we were talking about when GDPR was being passed, a bunch of sex workers were posting all of these terms of service updates that had been happening for a while since their inboxes were being bombarded. And you see a bunch of sex workers being like, hey, this is like a homophobic clause in this term of service, and it's been there for like ever. And so we're hoping that this helps to increase our literacy around tech. Feel free to ask us questions about it. It can be a living document. We can make changes to it if you have any suggestions. We're totally open to that. So thank you so much. And thank you, Ingrid. It's really beautiful. We love it. We printed 1 billion of them, so please take fistfuls of them and bring them to homes where they should be. Oh yeah, we have a hashtag, I think. I think it's hashtag Hassle and Hustling. Happy Hustling. Sorry for the hashtag. Happy Hustling.
Yeah, thanks to people on Twitter for tweeting this. Very, very nice. The community agreements apply to you too. Okay, so enough of that. We're now going to turn things over to our incredible panelists. But first,
Before that, as we move into the panel, we ask you to continue to think about how you can shift the resources that you have access to and how you can elevate the work that's already being done by community and that we've been doing for years. One lesson that you're about to learn is payment upfront. You shouldn't have to wait a few weeks for payment for writing a piece or say participating in a panel. So in the spirit of the event, I will be passing out payment for y'all. It's cash.
I don't think that was in the bathroom, but it's not quite Oprah, but really did. Okay, so let's introduce who's here. I'm going to start around that somehow with Laura Langley, who is a writer, a sex worker, and an activist. She began doing sex work in the year 2000, and she's worked both on and offline. Her fiction, nonfiction, and poetry appeared in Salon, Rumpus, Wired, Denver Quarterly, Los Angeles Review of Books, BuzzFeed, The Establishment, and Spread Magazine. as well as in anthologies, Those Workers Called Girls and Bad Boys, Off the Set, The Feminist Porn Book, and Coming Out of a Porn Star. And right now on Twitter, she is at Miss Lorelei Lee. To her Lorelei. Terrible strip club today. Okay. Next is Bardo Smith. Bardo Smith is the alias of an analyst, producer, and demi-mondaine living on the East Coast. She focuses her time on private consulting, erotic media production, and writing on economics and sex under capitalism. She enjoys kissing on men. She's currently studying for her Series 65. You can find her on Twitter at, please pronounce this for me.
Iconoclastia. It's not, you should just.
We're going to get into why your Twitter name keeps changing.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Okay. Next week, oh, sorry, clap. Please clap. Okay. Next we have Ashley Page, who is an international travel companion and connoisseur of kink, a woman of mystery, at Ashley Page NYC. Please clap. Last. We have Kiara St. James. Kiara has been a community organizer and public speaker for over 20 years. She's been instrumental in changing shelter policies that were discriminatory towards the trans community. Kiara is the founder and current executive director of the New York Transgender Advocacy Group, NYTAG, a grassroots 501c3 nonprofit organization, trans-led and intent on creating new opportunities for the trans community through various partnerships and innovative initiatives. She's on Twitter at Kiara Ditmas. I don't need to tell you to clap.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm grateful to all of you for being here. I'm really grateful that I'm going to hear all of you guys speak and learn from you all. As Melissa said, I started doing sex work in the year 2000 at the turn of the century, at the dawn of the internet. And I was definitely not online that year. I know many people were actually, but I was so not online that my first sex work job was a porn shoot for a website, and I thought, who even has the internet? No one's ever going to see that. So I was wrong about that. But I was 19, so I was wrong about a lot of things. And after that first job, I actually initially worked mostly through back pages of the weekly papers, which I recently learned that some younger sex workers didn't realize that Backpage, the website, is named after weeklies. Yeah. So it is hard now to conceptualize how different it was then, and how different it was to work then. So wasn't online, and I didn't have a cell phone, and I didn't have GPS. I didn't even know what GPS was. And I did a lot of work where I was at places where I didn't even know where I was, because I wasn't like following a map on my phone. I was, getting a ride somewhere, and no one knew where I was except for the people that I was working with. And I think back on those times, and I think about how some of the risks that I took then, I wouldn't take now, and I think about how much the internet has really transformed our access to safety tools. I mean, we can talk a lot more about that tonight, but that's something that still, I can't even conceptualize fully when I try to say what the difference was between then and now. So then after that, I worked for a period of time, as you all remember, before there was social media. But still, during that time, I started to get online in the early 2000s, like many people did. But I primarily, before social media, I primarily worked through third parties. And that was a safer way for me to work because there was someone who knew where I was, for example, when I went to work. But
that meant that I had a lot less control over my working conditions because there was always someone else who was negotiating what I was going to be doing at work, and having that initial negotiation and for how much, and then taking some of my money as well. And then after 2008, after social media happened, I think for many of us that was a big turning point in terms of just having access to each other to be able to share resources and share safety information and talk about like who is good to work with and who's safe and who's going to be an asshole, but also to have a platform to sort of create your own business, where you control everything, control the front, control what it looks like, control what your image is. I did an interview in like 2009 or something where somebody asked me if Twitter was the sex worker LinkedIn, and I was like, what is LinkedIn? But so I think yes, it's yes. So I'm just going to like touch on a couple of the big ways that now technology companies have really come in between sex workers and our work and sex workers and their ability to organize. And one of the biggest places that happens is through payment processors. I see all the heads nodding, everybody knows. Like you just get kicked off of those payment processors again and again. And when I was directing adult film, working for a company, we had a list from the credit card processor of what we could and could not publish. That was very specific. So, and it kept changing, like every few months we get a new one. Like for a while there was no peeing, and then you could pee on each other, and then only women could pee on men, but men couldn't pee on women, and then you like could pee on each other, but you could like pee next to each other. It got real specific, it kept changing, it was like, yeah, really hard to follow. And there were a lot of words you couldn't use, so words like force or rape, which makes sense, but, well, I mean, there's a version of the world in which that makes sense, but that also meant we couldn't use words like forceps or therapist, because it was embedded, the word force is in the word forceps, yeah. And we couldn't use the word cheerleader or Lolita. We had a performer that we hired a lot, and her name was Lolita, and she had to change her name. But for a while she didn't change her name. We just kept trying to figure out how to like write about her without using her name. We also couldn't do anything that was bestiality, but that meant we couldn't have any mythical creatures like no unicorns, no aliens, no vampires, no humanoid aliens. But then I would get into a big fight about how humanoid or how human you would have to look like. If I just did like a little effect where my eyes glow and move on the alien, is that okay? And it's not okay. I did like an X-Files parody that was like so important to me, and I loved it so much. But in order for me to be an alien in it, I could not, no one could touch me. I could be a naked humanoid alien if no one touched me. Those were the rules. So, I mean, this sounds a little bit frivolous, but of course, the ways that payment processors impact our work it becomes much more impactful than that. And one thing I'm just going to talk about is how they also control our funds when we're trying to fundraise to do activist work. And an example that I have is in 2017, I organized a sex workers bus to the Women's March in Washington, D.C., and I was collecting, people were contributing to the cost of the bus. And one of the people who contributed was my mother. And she kept getting her payment shut down, and she could not understand why. And actually, everyone who tried to contribute to the bus kept getting their payments canceled. And I kept trying to like change payment processors, but I just on the way here looked back at it and noticed that what my mom had written was, "We shall overcome" in the memo. And they were like, this is a security risk. That's the email that I got. We have, every so often we cancel payments for a security risk. So, you know, that's how they tell you. The other way that activist work is very difficult when it's being mediated through technology. So Twitter and social media were huge leaps forward in our abilities to organize, our abilities to talk to each other, our abilities to be anonymous and organized, to find each other. No matter what part of the country we're in, you didn't have to be in San Francisco or New York anymore. But since FOSTA, Zesta, and you know, before that as well, it would be disingenuous to say it's only consent, but people are getting kicked off with greater frequency, terms of service are changing, and there's so much fear. And so all of us have been self-censoring what we write, and in these last few months, there's been so much fear. Workers that have written to me are like scared to put up, they don't know what they can post anymore. They're scared to post safety information. They're scared to even be online at all. And you know, some of the stories are the people who just got online before FOSTA got offline right away out of fear. And this is a law that, as far as I know, there have been no prosecutions under it. So the private media companies interacting with the law creates this climate where this stifling happens. And the last thing that I wanted to say about that is that one of the reasons it's so impactful is because we are just ready to be discriminated against at any moment. We have had a lifetime of it, and you know that between that happens offline so frequently. Interactions with police, with our family, with dates, with doctors. Like, you get so used to getting kicked out of a room, getting shut down if you're speaking, just getting told that you're disgusting, that as soon as you see the threat coming, you know, you are like, I feel safer for me to try to shut this down before they tell me no. So that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm using a lot more time. I hope I didn't make sure it's a lot over my time.
So, where's my friend, the IT?
Oh, yeah, we have an image to put out.
Sorry, live stream, we're going to pull the lights for a second so people can see the words that are going to be on the screen. This wasn't meant to be a peace show.
Any technical difficulties? In the image I'm about to show, once it comes up on the screen, it came to my recollection when I was asked to put something on the board. Sorry. So I see that. So I really wanted to give context to the history and the community that I come from. So hopefully, I see it coming up. So bear with me and I'll read it. So this portrait, this image, is of Mary Jones. And so let me try to read it. Mary Jones, 1838, a black transgender sex worker, arrested for stealing clients' wallets. She is one of the earliest recorded trans women in America. The anti-abolitionist media mocked her during her trial. Thank you. She told the court her community accepted her. This is another piece. Jones was a trans woman living in New York City in the 1830s who made a living as a sex worker. Her clients, can folks see it? I don't want to be close here. Her clients were wealthy white men. It's not new. And after she slept with them, she'd steal their wallets as a bonus. Most of them never reported the thefts because they didn't want their conservative peers to know they had a fetish for black trans women. She was eventually charged with grand larceny, and someone turned her into the police. Jones was released after 5 years in prison, at which point she was arrested again for dressing as a woman. She served an additional 5 months. So let's give it up for Mary Jones. The reason why I thought it was important to start with that was because I stand on the shoulders of so many fearless black and brown trans women. And too often, when we talk about sex work, the conversation about black trans women, Latino trans women of color, period, is often removed. And yet we are the most penalized in this nation. Currently, we're up to 24 trans folk, and I should say maybe 23 of those 24 are trans women who have been murdered. Right? So I just want you to think about that. And it speaks to the disposability that black and brown trans women are receiving in society. So when we have these conversations and you invite me, I'm going to be intentional and talk about race and how race cross sections with so many of the issues that we're talking about today. And I just want to tell folks, thank you once again, I'm Kiara St. James, the director of New York Transgender Advocacy. So one of the reasons why I felt it was important to create an organization that was trans-led was because I wanted to get my community members familiar with the issues that are directly impacting our lives. And so if we are truly going to start addressing our own social disparities that we're dealing with, we're going to have to be at the table when folks who are making these decisions. We have to be there to give pushback. And so one of the things I'm intentional about doing now that I have a little bit of privilege, I thought I would have said that, but yeah, I do have a little bit of privilege. My organization has been funded, and we've been funded for the past 2 years. Within the past 3 months, we just got awarded 2 new funding streams. So I'm very excited about the work that my folks are setting out to do. And so one of the things that I'm able to do when I meet with folks throughout New York City, New York State, nationally, as well as internationally, is always talk about and bring up the fact that I am a sex worker. And so I feel it's important that we have to stop stigmatizing folks who are involved in sex work. Sex work has saved my life. It gave me an opportunity to feel validated. Gave me a community that I belong to. And so that is one of the reasons that I would never be ashamed of my past. And so I had a great friend named Amanda Milan. Has anyone heard of Amanda Milan? So Amanda Milan is a black trans woman who was viciously slashed in front of, right across the street from Port Authority, with sex work, what is that? Show I think it's still there. And so she managed to cross the street and she died in front of Port Authority. The taxi drivers who witnessed her murder, they applauded the fact that a black trans woman was murdered. She was one of the main reasons that I got involved in activism. And so that was back in 2002, I believe. I might be getting my dates wrong. And so it speaks to the fact that trans women of color have been getting murdered in this nation for a very long time, and yet there has been no justice for us. So one of the things that I am setting out to do with my community is getting them to understand that their life has value. The work that they do has value. One of the other things that I do is making sure that they're able to meet with city council members, to talk about why there's a need to protect trans women who engage in sex work. I often get pushback at a lot of the conferences that I attend because I often hear things like, well, one of the things that we need to do is get sex workers to stop engaging in sex work. And I'm always telling people, well, if that is your intent, you're going to fail. Right? And so how I operate and how I see things is through a transformative lens where we don't judge folks who are engaging in sex work, but we give them opportunities. And that's what we should all be doing, is giving community members opportunities, not shaming them, not making them feel that they made wrong choices in their lives, but giving them opportunities to really probably transfer what they have learned as a sex worker. Because trans women and sex workers, period, we put up with a lot, but at the same time, we have learned to be resilient, we have learned to depend on one another. And so we really need to start thinking how the opposition has been. And that is making sure that we're being consistent and meeting with city council members, legislators, letting them know that sex workers and folks who engage in sex work, our lives have value. I think they have done a great job in Europe. They have a sex declaration, in Europe, where sex workers are seen as a vital part of European society. So we really need to make sure that we're doing the same thing here in the United States. We need to make sure that whoever is going to be running against this crazy man that is in office now, that she or he supports the rights of sex workers and that they will repeal FOSTA and SESTA. And so that's one of the things that we need to make sure that we're doing now is mobilizing, having conversations with one another of how to make sure that our platform is not erased when the next election comes around, which is 2020. Yeah, so we need to start planning now and strategizing now, because too often our communities are reactionary, and we need to make sure that we are proactive. We need to make sure that we also are folks running for office. Right? We don't have to just wait on folks to say they're going to support our community. We can also nominate one of our own to run for office. And I think that's something that we need to do more of, to make sure that we also have a narrative when we talk about state legislations, national legislations. We need to make sure that we have folks who come from our community. Is my mic on? So we need to make sure that we're doing our part to prepare for the next election coming up in 2020. So yes, I talk about politics is when we talk about trans and having a trans identity. It's a political act. Currently there are, I believe, 7 states that have already implemented anti-trans legislations. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that folks in this room are doing is getting involved in helping trans folks in your community, folks that maybe new to New York City, because due to FOSTA and SESTA and all these archaic legislations, a lot of trans folks from the South, a lot of undocumented trans folks, they are coming up to New York City because folks are see New York City as a beacon of hope. We are considered a sanctuary city. So we all need to make sure that we're doing our parts to get them connected to trans-led organizations first. Let me stress that. Because we have currently 6 trans-led organizations. New York Transgender Advocacy Group, it's Destination Tomorrow, Princess Janae's Place, Trans Latina Network, Glitz, Cayenne, do folks know Cayenne? Yeah. She's awesome. There's Under Our Umbrella. So there's quite a few trans-led organizations here in the city that you can connect trans folks and gender non-conforming folks to. And if you want to get more information, please talk to me. Thank you.
experience in tech and finance industry is kind of concurrent to my work in sex work. I've been doing some form of sex work for about a decade. I didn't go online as a platform for sex work until about 5 years ago. So my experience kind of evolves out of doing a little bit of the free internet version of sex work and then into kind of the technologically savvy version of sex work. And for me, like the main thing that I want to get into is how, I guess I can phrase it like this. If you saw me across the street and you said, I just have an overwhelming urge to hand out women $20, you could come across the street and give me that money. No one's gonna arrest us, nothing is wrong. If you put a phone in between us or a computer, now all of a sudden, it's potentially legal. Somebody is gonna take at least $5 of those dollars from me. And the banks might actually decide to close our accounts as a result of that transaction. So that's kind of the scenario that sex workers, but not just sex workers now, because I've had people who pay me in a vanilla context now have their accounts flagged because of their relationship to me. So my concern is that along with the laws, costs and stuff, that the technology industry and the financial industries are actually contributing to like the redlining and exclusion of civilian people as well as sex workers from financial services that actually keep us safe and you know it's actually a way to keep people poor to deny them financial services. So if we're letting this happen to sex workers, if we're letting it happen to people who are more marginalized, it's going to bleed out into the rest of the people like this. So I don't want to take up too much time at the beginning. I have plenty of things to talk about. One of them being that my Twitter account's changed like 7 times. We're talking about this stuff. My Twitter. So I've been very vocal online. Some of you may know. Leading up until about the summer, and finally Twitter decided to suspend my account at, somewhere around $20,000. And, it had been not only a way for me to distribute my content, which is part of what I used to make a living, but just a way for me to spread information, to connect with other sex. Like I basically had no contact with the sex work community before Twitter because I just didn't exist. I was working completely on my own. So, what tech is doing right now is it goes beyond just sex work. It goes into anything that's adjacent to it. It goes into kind of provocative art. It goes into countercultural work. It goes into radicalism. They're censoring people for saying things that are not appreciated, basically. And because of the fact that we're on centralized platforms, they can just suppress the distribution of your message. And so that's what we're starting to see. And sex workers are seeing that with our news, we're seeing it with our just regular tweets. So it's not even specific to the adult nature of the industry, but it's the idea that these are people that we don't want appearing in a public space, and we need to somehow constrain them and push them to the side. So, okay. I'm planning to say no, please.
Good evening, I'm Ashley Page. I am a full-service sex worker, a pro-dom, a content creator. I do a little bit of everything. I've been in the industry for about 12 years now. Started back in 2006, created internet for kind of on the outskirts of internet and social media. It's huge impact on sex work. I have been an independent worker, which I am currently, and have been for the past 9 years. I was a worker that was patron, okay. Way back in the day, I was a sex worker that I did have a pimp, I walked the track, I have done stripping, camming, some of everything. And way back in those days, prior to me getting on social media and creating this brand, this image, platform where I can control the clients and pick and choose who it is that I want to see and kind of structure things in a way that actually keeps me whole. I worked with someone that did not have my best interests in mind, much like government now, and much like a lot of things now. It was a very different world. There was no screening per se, as far as like me knowing who it was that you were. Prior to you coming to see me, there was a phone number, an ad, you called, you didn't sound like a serial killer, I came to see you. You know, typically that was the situation. Resources like this board here that you have, resources like Danger Zone 411 was a major one that I found out about after about 3 years of being a non-independent worker. I was saved by one of these resources. There was a man named Michael Donegan who went around and he preyed on new girls in whatever location that they were in. He was wanted on the FBI's Most Wanted, and there are several of those men. And Danger Zone 411 was a lifesaver. This man called me and I knew something was wrong, like my little hodar went off, and but it went off, and I had this resource where I could type in and plug in this man's information, and there he was, and 15 pages of information saved me from actually going through and seeing this person. This has happened many times. Seeing how I've been in the industry for 12 years, I have seen a number of different clients. Mostly good. Some not so good. When I was not online, or when social media didn't have such a stronghold, and sex worker resources weren't so prevalent, certain instances where, say for instance, I worked in Texas, they have a police officer can say he's not a cop. Yeah, what is that? Entrapment. Okay, Texas has no entrapment. And they had a huge thing where cops were going around and they were just on girls, right? And then they were arresting, right? And then they had a couple of cops that were raping girls and arresting them, right? And we had no way of communicating with one another outside of just small hubs of girls that knew, you know? And it became essential to get this information out. You know, like Lorelei has said, a girl that's in California can contact someone that's in New York that's, you know, or put out in a voice, you know, that she had a bad incident with a client and let her know, because this girl is going on a tour, you know, we can all be well informed. And this client, say for instance, Joey the player out here, you know, they can keep making up different profiles and different aliases and different things, but now we know their MO. You know, we can kind of let one another know and process and plan. Even though we know that we are taking a risk, we can take a more informed risk. You know, and the way that things are changing now with us FOSTA, it is, I won't incite panic and say that all of our resources are gone, but it is definitely impacting the resources that we have left. A number of sites simply disappeared because the threat of legal action was too much, right? And this administration kind of cashed in on that, because if you just leave your own profile, right, then I don't really have anything to do, you know. And it is a shame because we have so many records, so many pages and years of information completely vanished overnight, you know. And it's great that we have platforms and different organizations coming together like this, where we can, you know, have more sex worker-based things pop up, and we can have more sex worker-based blacklists and different things pop up, and different networks and things, so we can still communicate with one another. But the reality of fear, the reality of panic, the reality of like legal action is real, you know. Like I'm an old hoe, I say it often, you know me, I'm an old hoe, okay? 12 years, I have, you know, I've done street-based work. I have gone, and a lot of people call it freestyling. I call it fishing, you know, we go and pick up people from bars, you know, and the way that things are changing now is forcing people back into street-based work, which is no judgment. I come from a very privileged, I come from a very privileged place now, where I have come from a place of charging $50 on a track, doing blow and goes, getting cut up and left on the track, waiting for my pimps to come and pick me up, to this point of I'm charging well above that. I have the privilege to be like, no, I'm not going to see you. You sound sketchy, bro. You know, I have a very, very specific amount of privilege, you know, but I have a lot of information, as a number of us do up here. We have, you know, at least a good, 100 years of pulling up here. You know, like, we have a massive amount of information and knowledge to share across multiple industries. industries, right? But we have so much fear now that we can't actually come together and be like, hey, so-and-so, you want to go start freestyling again because all your ad platforms are shut down? Let me give you the lowdown of what I learned from way back when. But I can't actually go to class and do that because now it could potentially be pimping and pandering or trafficking, yes. All because I'm sharing information, not because I'm telling you what to do, what to charge, where to go, who to pick up. That would be completely different. I'm just simply telling you what to do to stay safe, and I can't even do that, which is ridiculous. It's simply sharing information. But this is the place that we're at now. So we need more of this, right? We need other hoes connecting with other hoes and allies connecting with other allies and hoes and organizations to make this shit real because hoeing ain't going nowhere. Hoes ain't going nowhere. We will be around till the end of time. But we need to stay safe. We need other people to come and see that we are human and humanize us to the rest of the world and help keep us safe because there is really no other option. The amount of trans women, the amount of sex workers, women of color, regardless of where you are, if you are a sex worker, whatever label you attach yourself under, the amount in which we are dying for, it makes no sense. And something desperately needs to change. So I do hope that this is yet another step in going that direction.
It says it's okay, it's on again. I don't know, we're having some going in now. If you guys lose the mic, don't feel embarrassed about throwing a hand up and like we cannot hear you because we do want you to be able to hear us. So we also have a great assistive tech going on behind us, which hopefully that's helping too. One of the places I want to start, as I was covering Sessa and Costa, which I guess I should just start there. This is the first year in my life that I could do something as a journalist that stayed on a story. This is happening, okay. They're coming for us. They're staying on a piece of legislation, a wonky piece of legislation. Like my first story about Sessa Foster was, is this going to be a thing? I'm going to go talk to some advocates. And that was back in January. It went through in April. And I remember watching the hearings, and one of the things that Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut said specifically, we're not coming after your harm reduction and safety materials. Like, it was interesting that message even got through them, and I heard that was largely due to the activism of sex workers working with LGBT groups behind the scenes who had a little more access than sex workers did. But I want you guys to talk a little bit about this idea that we can't actually separate these things. They say, oh, we're not coming for your safety materials, we're not coming for your non-nudes, because there's this way that these things all get associated with one another, and they all go down together.
Well, I wrote a book a few years after I started doing online sex work, and I used a platform called Braintree to develop a sales portal for it so that I wouldn't have to take yet another hit on my income from that book. And because I had already been dinged by payment processors for doing sex work, they immediately suspended my development account, which was not adult related at all. I was using a different name with all of these different layers of separation. And, because the feds are watching, that account was signaled. And it was shut down without them saying anything. Like, they didn't say, well, we have a concern about X, Y, and Z things. It was like, your account no longer exists. So that's happened to probably, I'm not a demographic of one there, but it's the kind of thing where if you've ever engaged in sex work, or if they suspect you of engaging in sex work, or anything that even looks like sex work, they can potentially ding your income from other sources forever. So, is that because it's a risk, the content is a risk, or is it because they don't want me personally as a human being now having access to money and resources because of my history of doing sex work? Probably the latter.
Other folks can jump in too.
Yeah.
No, I'm not cutting you off. I'm just, okay. I think this is a really important point about how you cannot separate health and safety information from whatever it is they are going after. Because it's just like Ashley was saying, telling someone how to work safely
that's safety information, but that's also what they call trafficking. And it's combined with this, exactly as you're saying, this piece where when you do sex work, it becomes who you are, I mean, in the view of the public. And because of that, it becomes who you are to yourself, because you are so used to that, just mediating your interactions with everyone, every time. And then the other piece that I think is that the private companies, because they see us as embodying our work, they see our bodies as obscene, and they have a huge fear of law enforcement. Like, they are not, like, you know, we're over here talking about screening, talking about being careful, talking about, like, where are all of these lines, trying to understand what FOSTA says, trying to understand what we can post, and, you know, what is now illegal to say. The companies don't care about that. They don't care about where everyone is. They are going to draw the line much further than, like, if you read the lawsuit, the FOSTA lawsuit, some folks have brought a constitutional challenge against the law. And the Department of Justice responded with a motion to dismiss, in which they said, we would never prosecute any of this safety information or information about sex work that you guys are so scared of saying on the internet. But it doesn't matter, even what the Department of Justice says, because if it's in the law, anyone who's new to the office can change their minds about that. So that's very frustrating. And one other thing, Ashley, that you said that reminded me of this is how they're taking our resources away, and what that does, I think you guys are all sort of seeing this, is it compounds the harm. So it's not just that we can't use one payment processor or that we get censored from one website. It's that as these targets keep moving, we are losing resources, we're losing the ability to work, and then when you have fewer resources, you can't get more resources. It's like one thing that's crazy about sex work is how if you are poor, it can change your life in these crazy ways. You're like, oh my God, I didn't know how much I didn't have until I got a little bit, and then I could get a little bit more, and then I could get access to a lot more. But it's like once they take away that little bit, you're so far from getting any further.
I really think it's important as well that we take a page from the opposition, and we need to make sure that we are also collecting our own data to present. We need to make sure that we are able to push procedures where if they do vote on FOSTA and SESTA, that we have an opportunity to mobilize our community to really fight it before it's actually implemented into law. And so those are some of the steps we need to really make sure we're doing as we move forward and talk about how to dismantle FOSTA and SESTA.
I don't have too much more to add because but I do want to say, like, adding on to what you were saying, I have been noticing a lot of sex worker-based platforms coming up, especially with the swarm panic that came over when our websites were being shut down and everybody was concerned about when everyone was concerned about the Cloud Act, right? When everybody was concerned about the .com and they're coming for us, everybody's panic after it kind of subsided kind of went to, okay, now what do we do? Where can we go with this? Because our sites can't go down. We need to direct traffic here. We need to do all of these things. The way that we come together, like, our hand is being forced, our resources are ridiculously depleted. But the way we keep coming together, you know, and creating these platforms and different things, if there are more people that are in IT, that are in tech, that know what they're doing, let's do this and, you know, make some moves, because this can't be the only thing. You know, and there's, like, I can't help but go back to the ageism, just go back to the source, I see that site and it's so good. But even, what is it? Verify him? Yeah.
Like, even that, right? It's changed since Sesta Fosta came out. It started changing like a year or two ago. But, even things like that, like, we need to make sure that we're keeping our resources in some way, shape, or form.
There's also a corded mic that we have introduced to this. Probably the battery.
We want to talk a little bit about the myths and mass hysteria surrounding Sesta and FOSTA and how, from how the legislation passed, it was billed as a bill that would save trafficking victims. It was an anti-human trafficking bill. But what it really does is change the responsibility of platforms to censor their users. And so we want to talk about both the mass hysteria that led to it getting passed, as well as the mass hysteria in the community in response to it. And I talked a little bit about the sex worker community response to GDPR being passed, and then also Backpage coming down, which came down the day before Sesta was signed into law, was also in, even the people who lauded the bill took the credit for taking Backpage down, even though it was totally unrelated. And I think we're seeing it too recently with the ASMR videos. If you guys have seen that, their payment processors are being flagged. And I sort of would just love to hear you guys talk about the relationship between that and how do we tease out the truth from that. And I think bringing it back to the idea that this has been happening for a long time. I feel like FOSTA and Sesta sort of galvanized workers in a way that it hadn't before, so that people with larger platforms were speaking really publicly about this, and it's affecting people in really different ways who maybe didn't realize how homophobic society was. They were sort of getting by on their privilege. So we're going to talk about that. It's necessary.
So we have to really make sure that we educate our community about buzzwords. Anytime we hear terms like trafficking, child trafficking especially, we need to make sure that we are able to have a counter narrative to educate the community, the overall community, the legislators, sorry, so that they can understand that, yes, we also are concerned about trafficking of children, and so we need to let folks know that we are not an amoral community, we are folks with hearts, like trans women, cis women who engage in sex work. We do care about making sure that minors are protected. And so we need to make sure that we're cultivating relationships with faith-based leaders, with mothers. Folks who we wouldn't imagine in the past cultivating relationships with. We need to make sure that we are to let them know that they are impacting the lives of so many folks who engage in sex work. And so that's the first step that we have to take as a community.
I'm going to keep harping on as far as this go. The idea that we allow, as a tech industry, what we allow in censoring people from what they're allowed to say on the internet is essentially saying that we, as adults, cannot be responsible for upholding, basically moral behavior. And if we're going to censor people who are talking about certain things that we don't like, where does the line go? Because now we're seeing the ASMR stuff, but we're also seeing sex ed in schools go, lactation education go, anything that might potentially be jerked off to go. And so if we're making that the standard, it becomes like any woman's body, and goes beyond women too. I'm just saying it's the most common example in online sex work. It's kind of if any example of a body could be potentially sexualized, then any person putting their body on the internet could be potentially censored. And there really is no line, because if someone whispering into a microphone might get someone off, and then therefore that person is now not allowed to make money, that's a problem.
And I was just thinking, we always hear about, and I'm not coming for the church. The law is about priests and how they molest children. But we don't indict the entire Catholic Church because they have a few, or quite a few, bad apples among them. And so we need to also make sure that, we push that as well. Let folks know, like, yes, there are minors who slip through the crack and are sex trafficked. But most folks who engage in sex work are adults, and we are consensual in what we set out to do.
Well, I wanted to respond to this point about the panic that happened. I started posting about FOSTA pretty early, I think, in January, February, and so I got a lot of sex workers reaching out to me, asking me, like, what is this law and what is it going to do? And when it passed, I was getting signal calls from Thailand, from sex workers in other countries, asking, well, what about this kind of work that I am doing? Can I still do that? So one thing to notice is that this law is affecting people in other countries. Many of the websites that are changing their terms of service or kicking people off, those are used by sex workers in Australia and Mexico and Thailand. The point of this is that I have no answers. I couldn't say. I mean, I can tell you the law says that it creates a criminal and a civil penalty for facilitating the prostitution of another person as well as for trafficking. But what is facilitating the prostitution of another person? I don't know. The law doesn't clarify that. And frankly, I'm not sure that those phone calls that I was answering weren't facilitating the prostitution of another person. I'm actually, a little bit frightened that I just said that out loud live on the internet. But this is the thing, right? We're trying to share information, and I'm scared that I just said that out loud. There was something else I wanted to say, but I forgot what it was.
I wanted to touch on, earlier you were saying about the vagueness of such a process, and what is the facilitating the prostitution of another person. So, sorry. These definitions are fairly vague, right? And like I said, 12 years in, I think, this was about 8 years ago when I was in Dallas. I was caught in a sting. I knew what was happening. This is when I was not independent at the time. I knew what was going to happen. I felt it, kept saying I didn't want to do it. Go into the session, it's a bust. There is the detective, there is a whole SWAT team, and there is a woman from the IRS, right? It was a whole process, and they ended up taking me to booking, and during the time, so in the beginning, when I had gotten arrested, they said that they had seen my advertisement. It was on Backpage at the time. They had seen my advertisement, saw the picture, and knew that there was a young girl being trafficked on this number. I said, that's a whole lie. I'm the only person on this phone. There is no other person that has ever had an advertisement on it, right? Young and dumb, I didn't know don't talk to the cops, but here you go. So I let them know that was a lie, right? So they're pressuring me to try and say that there is a person that is being trafficked. They are under the age of 18 and they know this. They eventually de-escalate that to now I'm actually trafficking myself. Which I've never actually heard of that. I didn't even know what that was. Which actually became a common thread with a number of other sex workers that I have talked with, bonded with, that have gotten arrested and were informed they were trafficking themselves. right? When, like I said, it was, there was a trafficking of a minor, then it was trafficking of myself, then that went to, let me see, they went to felony, it was going to be, the charge was going to be felony prostitution, but because of my background and I was a good girl, they brought it down to misdemeanor solicitation, all in the course of 72 hours, okay? Still don't know what the fuck trafficking is. I don't even know what they did, right? But the vagueness of it, it escalated the situation so very drastically where, in all honesty, this is still something that I'm concerned with as far as, going and working a regular job or anything. Like, I'm a licensed massage therapist as well. This tortured me when I was going to school and having to, write an affidavit, get an affidavit and get a notary signed and, explain this whole situation, right? And the amount of respectability politics that I have to play into, right? To say, I just made a bad mistake and really, I was going through some things, not really a word, no, I'm more going through, right? But to play this game, this is what I had to do. But the vagueness of it, right, going back to these trigger words, buzzwords, there we go, thank you guys. These buzzwords, right, we hear them and we get this image, right, and if I would hear child trafficking, I would think horrible shit too. I would be like, I don't want any part of that. But that's not what this is. This was just an image to kind of fluff up all of this that's really having an impact on us. They are trying to squash us down, right? Us as in women, as in sex workers, as in anybody with an independent breathing income. It's at this point. Keep talking. But yeah, the myths and everything, that's what I was going to say. Also, I'm a kinky person. I have a number of friends that are on FetLife and different things like that. The impact and the hysteria that came from what Sesta Foster was going to do to just simple dating sites. Craigslist personal was shut down, Reddit threads were shut down, whole communities and everything. And then, what is it called? FetLife. Right? Where you can just go on and meet people and do your thing, right? Whether you're a sex worker or not. They have changed the terms of service. Now they have algorithms where they're going out and searching, and engaging in conversations where you can be saying, hey, let's meet up, you're cute, let's do this same thing. If they're perceiving that as a pay-for-play situation, you will be banned. Yeah, and that's bullshit. Your perception of what is legal is not always the same perceived through someone else's eyes. This is a very fucked up law.
I just want to add that the difference between what the law is and what's released is very different. It depends on who you are and where you are. And the laws and the terms of service are all intentionally very vague, so that they can do what they want and really control.
Something that I thought of before when you were asking that question also is that, it's absolutely, everything you're saying is true. Some of the laws are very vague, so they can use them however they want to, but also the definition of trafficking has expanded so dramatically in the last decade. And what used to be transporting people across a border to do coerced work, there were these three pieces, right? There had to be coercion, there had to be crossing the border, and it was still a terrible law then, and it was used to target immigrant workers so frequently. But now, for example, in the state of Louisiana, if you're under the age of 21, no coercion is necessary. If you're engaged in commercial sexual transaction under the age of 21, you're automatically a trafficking victim. In New York City, of course, everyone who is arrested for prostitution is sent to the trafficking courts. That's the diversionary court that they have here. And other folks on the panel is much more knowledgeable about that. But one thing that I was thinking about is how that has impacted activist work as well, and how it used to be, because I have been doing activist work for about a decade, and it used to be that we would go out and we would talk about sex work and we would talk about what it was, and we wouldn't really talk about trafficking because, we were like, of course we oppose coercion, obviously. Like, we are talking about workers' rights because we oppose coercion and we oppose shitty working conditions of all kinds. Like, that is what we're here for. But then it has only recently become really clear to me that when we're talking about trafficking, when we're talking about sex work, it's placed in opposition to trafficking in a political sense. In that when you go, I was part of this documentary on Netflix recently, and the people who made the documentary are very, very smart. We had a lot of conversations. They really seemed to understand it. But the finished piece, it looks to me as though this is a fight, a disagreement between victims of violence and sex workers who love our jobs all the time. And that is that is what it's being portrayed as. And it is so frustrating because, of course, if you think that this is just about my right to have sex versus someone else's right to bodily integrity and safety from violence, of course, safety from violence, obviously. But this is not that. When we talk about sex workers' rights, it is because we have experienced violence at work. And we don't call it trafficking. But the law now often does. We don't, something I've been thinking a lot about, and I will not talk forever, but is that, some of my earlier work experiences were through a boyfriend, an agent who we call Pimp Daddy Speed, affectionately, and how there were certainly instances where I came home at 2 a.m. after working all day, and they were like, oh, and you're doing anal at 6 a.m., and I just cried. And I was like, I can't. And they were like, well, you're gonna cry when you earn any money, And that, I had a very good situation, frankly. But what I want to talk about is that I don't think someone coming in and arresting the people who had control over my working conditions was going to make my life better. And that is really the difference between those of us who are talking about sex work activism, talking about decriminalization, talking about freedom of association so we can collectively organize to improve our working conditions, and people who are creating laws like FOSTA. They think that if we arrest Speed, who I, love, honestly, but who was kind of shitty a lot of times, that is going to somehow, fix this. And it's so crazy to me. Okay, that's all.
If I may, I just also want to say, this nation has never cared about black and brown bodies, right? Because if it did, we would not have had an institution called slavery that was state sanctioned. So when we talk about trafficking, the history and the origins of trafficking goes back to a boxer by the name, I might be getting the name wrong, Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson, and he was an African-American boxer who he loved the company of young white women. And so the way that they were able to arrest him and get him brought up on charges was to say that he was trafficking young white women across state lines. And so we also have to understand that these words that we're using are also, there's racial connotations to it, right? And so we need to always remember that black and brown bodies, this nation has never cared. And so it's really about saving young, cis white women, right? And so we have to really be honest about who is this law really, what is it really about? what is the purpose of it? Because if it was black and brown children being trafficked, there wouldn't be this outrageous reaction to it.
Even in DC, what was that, a year and a half ago? When there was a huge outreach of like there are black and brown girls being trafficked, missing, left and right. And it took, 9 months for that to actually get out. And then it disappears from the news. You don't hear nothing about it. Like all you hear about is this and this. I'm sorry, but those are stories. People are still disappearing. That's bullshit. We never hear about black and brown bodies, ever, outside of that much. That's all the focus we get, and if that much.
We're going to close on this question, which is your cue as our participants to think about if you have questions for the panelists, brief questions for the panelists. Be succinct in your questions. Get them in your mind now, because I'm going to call on you shortly. To the stories you're just sharing about the missing girls in DC, I say this with 100% sincerity. We don't know that they were trafficked. What happened in that case was girls who had gone missing for months and months and months started to all get described as trafficked once some anti-trafficking organization kind of seized on the story. What was actually going on was still bad. Girls were facing violence at home. They were running away. They had nowhere to go. But that somehow wasn't as exciting to people as the idea that they were trafficked. No, but that was how it was shared. That's okay, so this is my question. So that story, I also first heard that story. I said, oh my God, these girls are being trafficked. Like, no one's talking about it. And there's this media economy that we live in now that Sesta Foster really benefited from, right? When you were talking about, Laura, that everyone's been talking about those buzzwords, how this stuff gets shorthanded, how it gets into people's heads. I think it's really critical to remember that, like, that's also what we're up against, is the way that technology and the internet is driving these changes in the media, so that trafficking at this point is just sort of a meme, that people will stick on something because it will carry, because workers' rights and sexual violence apparently don't get the clicks, and it comes down to that.
And we also want to make sure we have time to talk about what your understanding of shadow banning is, and how do you combat it? How does it affect your work or business, the building of the community, and how do you monitor it, if you do? And I think one of the things which I'd love to hear you guys speak about is also how does it affect the building of the community? Because I think community is one of the strongest harm reduction working tools. You don't have to share advice or share bad date lists. And so how does having your professional account shadow ban affect how you interact with not only how you make money, but how you interact with the community as well?
I don't have an account, so.
I'm shadow banned to oblivion. Okay, so basically my Twitter account's invisible. So instead of showing, like if Ashley retweets my picture, it might show up to people who follow both of us, but it's likely going to show up to no one. So essentially I exist in an echo chamber. If you know my handle, you can come look at my page, but as far as like the functionality of Twitter itself, I don't have it. I don't exist, this goes beyond just me, of course, but it's like anybody who uses, who's kind of shadow banned as a status, if you use a hashtag, you will not show up in the search for the hashtag. You will not show up as a retweet. Your pictures in media especially will be throttled. Yeah, I mean, the idea that tech is this kind of like liberator and equalizer doesn't function if we decide that certain people should not have access to those tools. And in fact, like, the state is already hierarchical in how we distribute resources and who gets what. So sex work and technology both have the ability to kind of go around those blocks that exist. But now what we're seeing is they're just superficially imposing those blocks on us anyway. So kind of in the beginning of my experience using Twitter for sex work purposes, it was really easy for me, it's a natural thing for me to be able to build an audience. But then what would happen is, as soon as I became notable in a certain way, my account would get shut down. And it's like they might be able to cite something that is specific, like in one example, I told this guy who was saying that he goes to poor communities to get discount rates on sex work at the end of the month because he knows people are struggling. I told him he might want to consider jumping off a fucking bridge. Twitter decided that I was encouraging self-harm and deleted my account. I'm okay with that. But this is kind of thing that's going on. You know, so even when we speak out against some of the stuff that happens to us and to people in the community, you know, people are not coming to me personally at the end of the month to try to get a discount rate. But those women are not, or those people are not on Twitter talking back to this guy. I am. So I have a responsibility to say fuck you to that guy. But I'm not allowed. And we are not allowed as like a community in general to talk back at the people who are saying stuff about us and over us. And not just because we can't say the things, but we're actively being shut up. And so, you know, silencing us and depriving us of resources that we would otherwise be able to get through the internet is a form of violence.
Well, I just was going to mention the banning of hashtags, so on Instagram it's happened a lot, that you would go to a hashtag, any sex work related hashtag that we'd be using for organizing, and there would be nothing there. And, you know, I'm sure you guys know the way hashtags are used, but I did have to explain this to someone recently who didn't understand it. But it is a place where we put information and then anyone can go to it and find that information. So it's like a way of creating a community, and you don't even have to know the other people in the community, you just have to know the hashtag, you can get there. So when they ban the hashtags, then all that information is gone. And this happened to a friend of mine who is a disabled sex worker, and her disability is actually really rare. And I honestly don't remember the name of it, but it has a long name, and she had a hashtag that she was using to talk about her disability and to connect with other people who have her very rare disability, and they banned that hashtag as well because she was using it and she was a sex worker. So. I think if anyone wants to ask a question but doesn't want to be seen asking a question, if people want to mosey on over to the post-it notes, you can pass them to the team if anyone would like to do that. Or if a bunch of people want to do it, just pass them one so they want to do it.
And I think what we'll do for the sake of keeping things moving is we'll take 3 questions at a time, sort of buffet style. You all can select how many you want to answer. Okay? And we'll do this in a progressive stack. So everybody has a question right now. Stick your hand up. We have 1, 2, 3. Okay, you're first.
We have a second mic too, if you'd like. Come on, man, now it's...
So I'm a reporter. Sometimes I report on sex work, and Melissa was talking about basically how reporters occasionally really fuck up. And you're all here, I guess. What are some best practices, a way for reporters to not fuck up? Because people unfortunately listen to reporters more than they listen to sex workers.
Yeah. Do we have a tracking mic? I can just keep this on today.
I can be back too.
So first of all, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of information. And I wanted to ask, it seems like with tech startups, more and more what we're seeing is sort of a gentrification of the tech platform, where the way it's able to grow is when companies, sex workers come on, they use it as a platform, they use it for community, they use it in a way that brings the company wealth, that brings the company visibility, and then inevitably the sex workers get picked off once it is big enough. And wondering if you have any thoughts about, as we engage with newer platforms and try and find platforms that will support us, ways that there might be to find solidarity or find some sort of leverage before we repeat the cycle again and again.
My question is also related to media and handling the media as a sex worker. Kind of actually very related to the first question. How can we be more media literate when we're being talking to in a certain way and not really wanting to get our words like twisted? I was in the same documentary, and if I had known that they were going to put us against sex trafficking survivor, like I would not have done that documentary. Like, what kind of advice can you give for sex workers that are being asked to contact or to talk to media?
Well, I'll just speak to that point and say that one thing I just want to say is that it still happens to me, and I've been talking to media for like a decade. So there's nothing you can do that is going to make everything they write about you accurate. And that's very frustrating. And it's especially frustrating because oftentimes you will say 5 things and they pick one, right? So if you say, I love my job, and then sometimes it's shitty, and also I've had this other experience that takes me 5 minutes to tell you about, they're going to say, oh, she loves her job, right? They're going to use just the thing that fits into whatever narrative they've already created. I don't know, so I'll try to think about more that I could tell you about that, but just the one thing I want to say is that you should never feel responsible for the way that you've been portrayed when they do it wrong.
Don't fucking bite us. Don't copy our work and not credit us. We're coming from a place that non-sex workers cannot come from because they don't see it. So when you take work that we put on the internet or organizing work that we've done and you cover it, but without engaging in the actual creators of that work, you dilute it and you take the teeth off of it. A lot of our work is designed to penetrate things that are fucking us up. And a lot of institutional journalism is designed to kind of cover what exists. So without including the fuck up part and the dick of what we're saying, we can't fuck things. Thank you.
So, I would first say, when it comes to reporting, make sure that you're doing due diligence. Make sure that you are reporting both sides of the story. You know, too often, the folks that have the most equity when it comes to getting a biased story like sex trafficking, they are the ones who get hurt the most. So we need to make sure, or you need to make sure that you are doing due diligence and reporting both sides of the story. Also, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we are creating spaces where sex workers can create our own apps, right? And that we can control our own platform. And that's something that we really need to think about. Like, how do we create platforms that we control? And that's something that we're putting out there now.
I also just wanted to say that we do have some media guides within the community for journalists and for sex workers who are talking to media. And we can either put them up on the Happy Husband site or just email me some of that in a week or something like that. There's some best practices.
I'm going to do one more buffet. So I ask you, you put your hands up now. If somebody already kind of talked about what you said, deprioritize yourself, but if it's something you haven't covered yet at all, put your hand up. Oh, we have a paper question. Hands higher, higher, higher. Okay, you, and we have you, and you in the back.
Can everybody I say you too kind of understand?
Right after the passage of Process ESTA, what I noticed is there was a huge upsurge in crowdfunding, and what I'm interested in is what potentially might be the future of crowdfunding for harm reduction, for people who are the hardest hit. So people who need to pay the rent, people who need to pay medical expenses, people who are disabled, and this is their only form of work. Personally, what I'm afraid of is I'm not quite sure if, it seems likely that these crowdfunding platforms and these websites will then shut down and take all the money because of this. And I'm wondering if you guys have specific information on how to mitigate that.
I was interested in what you were talking about in terms of like shadow banning and all that stuff, because I mean, I don't know if you have like the kind of communities with like male sex workers at all, but I was noticing, for instance, like on Twitter, like some of my gay male friends, they have like all of this very explicit like images and even like GIFs that are like from a very like well-known like male porn actor that just comes up all the time. So I'm wondering, like, is there actually like a like a misogynist element to this thing? That's like very specifically like, yeah, that's very not just about against. That's not that's just not just homophobic. It's just misogynist, like straight up misogynist, like against women's bodies.
Sources say yeah. I'll get it, yes.
I was wondering a little bit about just sort of like machine learning and like visual identification. I think Melissa, you actually wrote a little bit about this, like how sex work in a lot of ways has like preempted a lot of other parts of the internet. Porn was started and that made the internet more popular. In some ways, sex work can also be a champion of like human rights and civil liberties movements that haven't, kind of kicked off yet. So I'm thinking like in Europe, there's sort of this like right to be forgotten that isn't really spoken about as much in the U.S. And I wonder, like as a sex worker, if you think about like, the future, like people being able to like find a way to trace your image and stack of images and identify you no matter what you call yourself at that time and how you change your life. Whether those technologies and maybe the required activism that needs to preempt that is something that sex worker rights communities are currently working on. And if so, what parts of the law can sort of use to do that?
We have one more question here. I know some of you may have actually interacted with lawmakers. Do any of them know that this is actually killing us, especially people of color and trans workers? Those are our 4 questions.
Great questions. So let me remember what they were. So I really feel that Joyce is tied into the responsibility of reporters, right? Making sure that they're doing due diligence. One of the things, journalism is the first line of defense when it comes to getting the word out. Like when you talk about the medical profession, it's the Hippocratic oath that says do no harm. That's your first duty. So reporters in here, the first duty is to do no harm and make sure that both sides of the story are being heard. Because what I see happening is that there's a famous, I don't know if it's a poem from the 1940s, 50s, when they were talking about they first came for the gypsies and nobody said anything. And so that's what we're experiencing right now. We're going through a period in this country where one by one they're picking us off. And so if journalists are not doing due diligence and reporting the truth, we're next, and only Fox News is going to be where folks we're going to be getting our information from. And we don't want that. And so I'm trying to remember why I have a mic.
In summarize it, there was a future of crowdfunding, there was gendered shadow banning, misogyny shadow banning, and then the question of the right to be forgotten, which is something more common in Europe, and just opportunities for sex workers through that.
Yeah, we really need to make sure that we are looking to Western Europe, when it comes to how we can get it right and how we can counteract what we're experiencing now. As far as I have the privilege to meet with legislators, so I've been very honest, and I definitely want to make sure that I continue to have these conversations, and not just me, but I give my community the opportunity to speak their truth. One of the things I know is happening at a lot of the conferences I've been attending is that they are understanding and giving sex workers a platform, and they're understanding that they have to be inclusive in how they are talking about sex work and not doing it in a judgmental way. So, I'm going to pass it on.
I think some of the factors that probably not in this room, but in a lot of people, we still have a sense of schadenfreude that's preventing sex workers from justice. And it's the sense that sex workers are getting quote unquote money for nothing, or it's easy money, or they're not doing anything for, and that comes from ignorance. People don't know how much work goes in behind the scenes and how much admin workers and everything else, and that's just like a starting point for that. But the second point is like examining how we view money itself in this country and who should have it. Because we really do have a problem with people having even their basic necessities covered if they're not doing quote unquote like what they should be doing, i.e. having a real job, i.e. whatever it is. So people who are in sex work are primarily hit by this because of the stigma, but this applies to other people too, who are doing kind of non-traditional work, part-time work, freelance work, domestic work, all of the stuff that is excluded from the economy, but ultimately is work. So it's some of the conversations that are happening around sex work goes out and weighs out much further. Just ignore that. Ignore this fucking pig.
I want to hear about crowdfunding. If anyone has anything to say about future crowdfunding, no, you can skip it. It's huge.
It's huge. No, absolutely. And that is, because it's so broad how the federal government is looking at trafficking, it's going to be next, and that's why we all have to be vigilant in making sure that we are having these type of conversations with one another so we can go out and educate our overall community. So it's going to be next. Also, Rent the Board was the first major website to be impacted by foster and incest. But if majority of folks engaging in sex work were cis, white, male, and hetero, you would see a very different narrative when we talk about sex work. Right, and so when you look at someone like Hugh Hefner, why was he glorified, for doing what he was doing for so long? And so we cannot forget that how race plays an integral part in this discussion.
The only thing I want to say about crowdfunding, I don't have any idea about the solution, but I just want to say that sex workers are fucking resilient and never give up. And every time the platform shuts down, someone finds another way for us to do it. So that's all I'm going to say.
I don't want to ask you guys to leave, and we're not going to do that just yet. We have a couple of things we want to close on. I feel really badly about not being able to take more questions, but we have the internet. So if you like questions and you have the internet, you can tweet at us. You can put your questions on hashtag #HackingHustling. You can also stick around after until IB kicks us out. So, closing. Oh God, the live stream. We don't want to show you this live stream. Is the live stream any questions? No. Great, cool. Thanks for watching. We're so glad to have everyone who's here in all the different ways that they are here. No shade on the live stream. Okay, how do we close this out? We have several things. We'll start with this one. Should I do last one? Okay. Where's David?
Oh.
Hi. Okay. On Saturday, you all heard about our
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Tifa Tech. We're an organization that focuses on changing the tech industry by empowering trans and gender non-conforming people to join the tech industry. So we are thrilled to be collaborating with Melissa and Blunt and everyone at iBeam to be leading or facilitating the tactical Skillshare portion of Hacking Hustling on Saturday from 1 to 4 p.m. We're going to be covering an array of different workshops, including doxing self-defense, social media lockdown, threat modeling, and then we'll be doing installation and use of different encryption technologies on site. So come with devices ready. And ours will be online on ibeamorehackinghustling.com.
Thanks so much.
Of course.
I also just wanted to thank iBeam again for having us here. I've been going to tech conferences for maybe like 6 or 7 years, and just about never do I hear sex work mentioned, even when the panels seem like it's a 3,000 sex workers not talking about it. And so thank you so much for having us in this space. And I ask all of you all to go back to your communities and think of resources and institutions that you can make partnerships with. Like putting on this event with iBeam is amazing because they already have this infrastructure to do events like this. So thinking of ways that you can make partnerships so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can continue shifting resources to people that are most impacted by criminalization. And going into that, we have our community curator who curated an amazing show in the room over there. Who haven't taken a look at it. So they'll be talking a little bit about the show, and then they'll invite you to join them for a brief tour.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Britt Schulze, and I'm the curator for the community exhibition Horrors Will Rise, Protest Art and Resistance Ephemera Against FOSTA and SESTA, which is running in conjunction with the Hacking Hustling programming throughout this weekend. I'm an art historian, a community organizer, and a sex worker. And I'm impacted negatively by SESTA and FOSTA. I have many names. Some of you know me by one I'm using tonight, others by another, and others by yet another still. But regardless of the naming that I decide to use on any given evening, or online for that matter, I possess the same skills, the same knowledge base, the same desire to have my labor recognized and valued, know that my comrades are safe after a demonstration, and challenge others to engage in rigorous dialogue and use frameworks that will expand their ideas of art, culture, and history. I do this as an educator, and I do it as a hoe. I am so humbled to be included alongside of all of the organizers and speakers this evening. Our working community has so much to teach those who are wise enough to listen. I want to thank everyone at iBeam, especially Jay, personally making a number of topics while installing, and for help making all of Horrors Will Rise happen. I want to thank Melissa and Blunt for this inclusion, and of course, thanks must go to my co-conspirator Aaron Hummus for his help during this show's installation, and quite possibly most importantly to my comrade Alicia Walker, who cannot join us this evening because of the racist, poor-phobic criminal legal system. She sends her love and solidarity to all of y'all from Decatur Correctional Facility in Illinois. The following is the curatorial statement for the show. Horrors Will Rise came about because they did just that. This exhibition is an archive memory of sex worker and accomplice resistance. It seeks to reintroduce objects that were collected and preserved after being actively used, worn, held, read in protest to themselves, to new viewers, and viewers who might have wielded or created these objects. It seeks to remember the ways radical sex worker community have continually participated in struggles for social change. It recognizes each object of resistance as art, that all art is labor, and that there is no labor more in need of recognition than criminalized labor. Months have passed since these objects were assembled together with their creators, and in those months, sex workers' predictions about the necessity of struggle, awareness, action have come to pass. More deaths of sex working or trading people have been reported, arrests remain high. Resources are still scarce for labor trafficking survivors, and online platforms continue to dwindle for advertisement and streaming. In short, as Hacking Hustling co-organizer Melissa Grant has commented, sometimes people have referred to sex workers as kind of canaries in the coal mine of the internet. In this case, I'd say it's even worse because we aren't paying attention. They're almost like the Cassandra in the coal mine. Throughout the exhibition space, you'll see protest art and resistance ephemera from recent demonstrations against SESTA and FOSTA, or the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act and the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, which were recently passed into federal law on April 11th of this year, much to the fear and the fury of sex workers and survivors. The central object of remembrance focused on an International Day of Action, sparked in Lyon, France, on June 2nd of 1975, which became the International Day of Struggle for Sex Workers, or as it is referred to in historically within sex worker community, International Whores Day. Just as the sex workers occupying St. Nazaire Church in Lyon were making protest art out of creative necessity, right? They were occupying. These pieces can be felt and held and imagined as comrades to the absent ephemerality of those pieces. Included in the exhibition are images from 4 International Whore Day demonstrations which took place on June 2nd of this year. Chicago, Washington, D.C., Oakland, and New York. It should be noted that over 20 cities worldwide took to the streets that day. The pieces affixed to the walls, stacked and displayed, are primarily posters, signs, banners, decorated red umbrellas, a symbol of sex worker rights and solidarity, print copies of speeches given at rallies, and photographs. There are also images from subsequent demonstrations led by sex workers and accomplices toward decriminalization, community building, and gender justice. Named for a line taken from a piece written by Alicia Walker, who, like I said, is an incarcerated former sex worker and current organizer with the Support Host Collective, Whores Will Rise reminds its viewers that this unapologetic resistance to state violence, policing, the criminalization of survival, and whorephobia is what is needed most now. Sex workers have historically been at the forefront of liberation struggles. This exhibition is an archived memory of a community ready to fight. So without further ado, or maybe we want to say a few things, of course. One more ado. But I'm glad you do stick around, because I think you're going to get a tour too, yes?
Yes,
Okay.
we can do that, yes, stick around. It is deeply humbling to not have a microphone after all.
This and that, thank you. Start it over. It is deeply
Humbling to.
All right, we'll do it live. It's deeply humbling to be back at IBEAM after 12 years. The first time I was here was as a panelist speaking about a resident's work, which was about sex work. And it wasn't work by sex workers, but it was work done, performed, and created with so much respect for sex workers. To be back in this space with a panel entirely of sex workers and sex worker rights activists, with art curated by sex workers and sex worker rights activists, created by sex workers and sex worker rights activists, and to continue this on Saturday is beyond anything I could have imagined. So thank you all for coming and being part of this. And if you stick around, do you have anything to add?
I have 2 things to add. One is, after you guys see the show, we hope that it inspires you to come out into the streets of Jackson Heights to support the trans Latinx sex workers who will be in the streets for Marcha de las Putes. And there's information that we'll be passing around. And I think it's really important to continue, not only to continue these conversations, but also to show up in the streets and speak for the most heavily used. So I'm sure I'll see you all there. It's from 2 to 6. And if you have any questions, you can find